Dr. Ailey Cohen is a board-certified rheumatologist and integrative medicine specialist, as well as an environmental health expert right here in Princeton. She's collaborated with the Environmental Working Group, Cancer Schmancer, and other disease prevention organizations, and is co-editor of the textbook Integrative Environmental Medicine, part of the Oxford University Press, while Integrative Medicine series. She created Smart Human in 2015 to share environmental health, disease prevention, and wellness information with the public. She lectures nationally on environmental health topics for elementary, high schools, colleges, medical schools, physician training, and people like us. So we're really fortunate to have her. And I know, Dr. Cohen, you have always been a tremendous supporter of suppers, and I'm happy to see you here today.
You know, the concept of, and the chapter is named, "You are what you eat." And of course, one of my favorite quotes is from Hippocrates, "Let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food." And that was dated back to 460 BC. So, you know, this concept that food is so critical to human health, I think, you know, it's so extraordinary that it's passed through the ages. And you know, I think up until the last 200 years have we sort of gotten it wrong in terms of modern day eating, and the quality of our food, the quality of our soil. And so just to kind of go back a little bit in terms of regulation in this country, because I want to teach people really about our food system in a very simplistic way. And then I want to give recommendations, because that's what the book is about, NonToxic, which just came out, is to give people not just the problem and why people should care, but really the solutions, because that I think was missing in the market. And it was missing for me as my journey began about 8 to 10 years ago, learning how chemicals affect human health, chemicals. So to begin with, we have right now with our food, processed foods, we have over 10,000, between 6 and 10,000 allowable food additives. So what's a food additive? What are things that are allowed to be added to food after they've been grown or, organized, so to speak? So food additives include coloring, flavoring, sweeteners, preservatives to keep the shelf life longer, emulsifiers, which are generally used to make foods look creamy. For instance, there's a lot like red seafood is an emulsifier, also known as carrageenan, but we also have synthetic forms of emulsifiers. And these are generally chemicals that are added deliberately to the food product. So we call foods added deliberately as direct food additives. And then we have indirect food additives, which are really unintentional additives to food, perhaps from production and manufacturing, maybe from the growing of that crop that became those chips. We might have glyphosate and some pesticides, fertilizers from soil that get absorbed into plants that become the wheat that become our chips, or potatoes. We also have food packaging chemicals, which are also well known to migrate into the foods and drinks that are in that food packaging. And a lot of people don't realize how much food packaging does contribute to chemicals in the human body. I'll give you an example is bisphenol A, or BPA, which many people on this Zoom meeting will recall was taken out of plastic baby bottles in 2012. And in fact, that was largely due to the research of my co-author, Fred Von Saal. And he's a pretty famous emeritus bench researcher. So that was a lot of his work and his international colleagues. But bisphenol A, BPA, is a known harmful chemical called an endocrine disrupting chemical. It was discovered to be an endocrine disruptor, perhaps first amongst all of the now known endocrine disruptors. And that's a food packaging chemical that typically lines the inside of all canned foods and drinks. It's a plastic epoxy resin, and it's just a very thin coating of plastic that keeps the food and the drink away from the aluminum or metal pans. We got it out, I should say I didn't do anything. Fred and his colleagues helped to get BPA out of those plastic baby bottles, but we do know that BPA is now still one of the most high volume production industrial chemicals worldwide. And it's in enormous number of products, but particularly canned foods and drinks. And because of that, we now know, after much research, this is pretty pervasive, robust international research, that this chemical bisphenol A or BPA can get into the food that are in the cans and drinks. And we know this because you can measure the levels in the food, but you can also measure the levels in human beings that are consuming foods from canned products. One great study was done by Harvard School of Public Health, where they took 75 participants and they changed out their lunchtime soup for either progressive, they actually named the label progressive soup that's canned, versus homemade fresh soup with no packaging. And they had the 75 participants change nothing else in their diet but their soup. And then they had a 5-day washout, and then they switched them from, say, the canned version of soup to now the clean, non-packaged soup. And they found at the end of this study that participants who were having the fresh soup had a decrease of 1,100% of bisphenol A in their urine. And so we now know that you can not only detect BPA primarily through urine testing, but it also has a half-life of about 6 hours. So every time you stop using canned foods, for instance, you are going to lower over time, a very reasonable amount of time, the amount of BPA or bisphenol A that's actually in your body. And so back to the concept that we have 10,000 food additive chemicals that are intentional and unintentional, direct and indirect chemicals, but the indirect are often food packaging. BPA is a big source of indirect chemicals. Now, why does this matter? Well, it turns out from federal regulation. So 1938 was the first real law that went into effect. It was called the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And that was really put into place for food regulation, but it really didn't do much. It really didn't have much to say in terms of personal care products or foods, mostly drugs. But then in 1958, they added the Food Additive Amendment. And that was generally intended, this is 1958, to really start to put some oversight, maybe some testing into the food additives. But what happened is it really didn't stick. And we have grandfathered in, upwards of 79 to 95% of all food additives has been grandfathered in, particularly after 1958, but also since that time, we've had an enormous explosion of food chemicals that are now allowable and have never been tested for safety and or toxicity, particularly in certain populations, particularly pregnant women, in young children, and in immunocompromised populations. The so-called generally regarded as safe or GRAS, I wouldn't say certification, it's more or less a heading, really does not do justice to what was intended with this 1958 Food Additives Amendment, which really is a failure, I think, in terms of public policy. And now that we have these chemicals that are added into our food, you can't even have them removed. They are not allowed even to be removed now. It's up to manufacturing to remove these chemicals. It's insane. And so we really need to think about in terms of what we're doing to our bodies, because many of these chemicals, now getting into the physiology of many of these chemicals, do in fact act like endocrine disruptors, or EDCs, which means that they have this ability, which was just discovered in the last 20, 30 years, more or less, of mimicking human hormones in the body. Particularly BPA, for instance, mimics estrogens at very low levels. It can block testosterone and other androgens. It can affect thyroid hormone. All of these hormones are incredibly sensitive. That's how we evolved. We evolved as human beings to have these signaler chemicals that can actually do tons of physiologic benefits to the human body: growth and development, brain development in a fetus, metabolism, glucose metabolism, say for insulin is a hormone. So we have bone development, so osteoporosis, osteopenia is based on hormones. We have intelligence that's based on iodine and thyroid hormone from the mother in terms of in utero growth. Fertility is based on hormones. Obesity, weight gain is based on hormones that affect fat cell growth and development. And then, of course, we have hormone sensitive cancers, which are the breast, uterine, ovarian, testicular, prostate, thyroid, among them. So, when we talk about these chemicals that we're now consuming, upwards of 5 pounds a year of food additives, that most of us follow the standard American diet, which is cheap, has limited nutrition, high in calorie, but also high in chemicals. We're starting to see why at low levels over time, these endocrine disrupting chemicals in our food can really contribute to human health issues. And that's what we're seeing. The epidemiology is showing that humans in general, and it's not just from food, mind you, but that's our talk today. But since, we consume so much food every day, we also consume drinking water, which is another big area I love to talk about, because we have a lot of dirty water in our country, even though it's better than third world countries, of course, but we still have limitations. Consumption of food and drink are our biggest load of exposures for many, many chemicals, including endocrine disruptors. So again, it's not just the food itself, it's actually the packaging as well. It's the plastic Tupperware and microwaving in plastics. When you heat up a material like plastic, like our food containers, that those chemicals often leach into the food and drinks that they're meant to hold. When you have drinking water from a plastic bottle that's in your car and it's 100 degrees, very similarly, that plastic is a very weak material and it will eventually make its way into the drinking water. And so we really need to think not just about food quality and food nutrition, we need to think about food packaging and what we can in fact do to lower those risks in terms of exposure. You cannot control where they necessarily, unless you know that you vetted it out, except for organic, what animals are eating. If they're eating pesticide-laden wheat, corn, feed, a lot of it is genetically modified, which means it has an enormous amount of pesticide, particularly glyphosate, because many GMO seeds are matched to glyphosate. They're partnered genetically. So the only thing that has teeth in this country is USDA organic or organic labeling. And there isn't, we actually go through the different types of labels and where they are on packaging and what they mean in terms of their content. But essentially, natural does not mean anything in this country in terms of labeling. Really, there's nothing but organic that has any teeth. And that has criteria. So I'll share some of that criteria, because I think it's worth noting. So organic labeling criteria basically began around, I want to say 2002, okay? And 2002, basically, they wanted to create standards by which organic would all follow suit, and there would be fines for people that broke those requirements. And so basically, by definition in the US, organic products in food, not personal care, because that's not necessarily legit, or in cosmetics or cleaning products, but in food. Organics have to be free of synthetic additives, artificial preservatives, colors or flavors, chemical pesticides, and chemical fertilizers. It can't be processed using industrial solvents, it can't be using bioengineered antibiotics or genetically modified ingredients. It has to bear an official USDA label for organic, so it has to have the appropriate labeling. And really, even if it's imported, if it's organic and imported, it has to follow all the criteria as we follow in the US. So, listen, organic foods may be difficult to access in parts of this country, in food deserts. But we do have big box stores that are littered across the country that do carry their own organic brands in their freezers, even if they're not in the refrigerator. So you can get organic frozen produce, which is excellent. You can get organic salmon fillets that are wild caught, for instance, not organic, but wild caught. So where small shops may not have access to some of these organic produce and products. You can also look to big box stores now that have seen the benefit financially for them to carry their own lines of organics. And I've seen that over the last five years explode. So I'm hoping that brings down costs so people have more access to cleaner organic food. An educated consumer is really where it's at. We have to all do this for ourselves because there is no regulatory oversight. It's not in our favor. We can say this about drinking water. We can say this about cosmetics. We can say this about cleaning products. We're really in a pickle here, and it frustrated me so much that I felt like this had to come out. This book had to come out so I could really, educate people on what to do, because that's what we're missing. But there is lots of stuff we could do. Like, for instance, say you don't have access to organic produce for whatever reason, frozen or otherwise. You can get conventional or non-organic produce, and you can wash or soak that produce in baking soda with warm, clean water. You can soak it in white vinegar, 1 part white vinegar to 4 parts water to soak and get off that pesticide residues as best you can. There's the Dirty Dozen Clean 15 list from Environmental Working Group that we've put in the 2020 list. We got that just in the nick of time before printing. And that basically looks at all of the produce. Well, it's a sampling of produce across the US, and it's not organic, it's conventional produce. And what they do is they measure or, somehow figure out the amount of pesticide residues on samples of conventional produce across the country. And they come up with a list of the Dirty Dozen, which is the top 12 produce with the highest amount of residue on the skin of their produce, versus the Clean 15, which are the top 15 that have the lowest levels. So if you're looking to get produce that may be less toxic, that's not organic, you can go to that list and kind of go by that list. For instance, strawberries this year, as an example, were the #1 residue-laden produce that they tested. And that's a shame, because we feed our kids strawberries all the time. We go out to restaurants, we have strawberries everywhere. So, we have to know that maybe that's not a great choice unless we washed it ourselves and we tried to get the residues off. And maybe we wanted the frozen organic strawberries because they're now available in the big box store, and that's much safer in terms of chemicals. And then you can also go to the Clean 15 and say, this is a Clean 15 one, and it's accessible and has low residues, pesticide residues. Maybe that's what I'll buy this week. And you can buy also seasonally. So anything that's in season that's organic tends to be much cheaper. And you can go by that process too to lower costs. But we have to be honest that all of these chemicals in the human body really does increase risk for human health conditions. And we know this because all of the infertility rates are going up. It's not just because women want to have later babies. I get that, but it's certainly a big issue when it comes to fertility and getting pregnant. We know obesity is a big issue. It's not just from sedentary lifestyle, it's from chemicals that are actually messing with our hormones, particularly in thyroid hormone, which is a metabolism hormone. But we also have higher rates of hormone sensitive cancers. And this is not just from genetic mutation. This is from environment. And breast cancer, 90% of breast cancer, it's Breast Cancer Awareness Month. So I want people to know 90% of breast cancers are linked to environmental exposures. 10% are genetic. So we really need to think about this for our bodies and for the health of our young people, our young girls who are using, chemicals as feminine care products and tampons with chemicals. We need to think about organic versions of those products if we can, because that exposure over a lifetime, plus environmental chemicals from food and water, is throwing estrogen into our bodies that really does increase risk for breast cancer. I mean, the point is that basically you can wash off only so much, but if it's actually taking up pesticides from the soil, you can expect there would be some in the fruit, but of course that's very hard to actually calculate. I would say that the fruits that have a skin, like pineapple and watermelon and papaya, kiwi, they generally are safer to eat because you're not eating the skin, you're eating the interior. Because a lot of these chemicals, especially glyphosate, is used not just as a pesticide, but it's also a desiccant. But it's the idea is that you want to stick to the fruits that have no soft skin, like peaches, berries. They tend to often be very high in pesticide load. If you look at apples, if you look at environmental working groups list, you can see some consistencies almost every year. It's always the berries, the apples, spinach is very high, kale is high this year. So you could be thinking you're doing everything right, and yet you're getting this load of pesticide with your kale. And then you're carrying it in something that you might want to put on in stainless steel versus plastic, So it's a sad game to have to play, but I think that recommendations really that are simple, I think is the way to do it. And I think people can do it very, very simply, but it takes time. You just don't want to rush this process because it's overwhelming. And you don't have to give up everything. I didn't give up my hair color, so I'm still working on that. Ideally, when you walk through a space, you really want to think about air quality. What is the stuff you're putting in the air, be it cleaning products that air off? Is it air fresheners, plug-ins, all these synthetic air fresheners that are filled with endocrine disrupting chemicals called phthalates mostly? You want to think about the air. You want to think about what you touch and any chemicals that are on surfaces, whether it's a smoker who's got smoking residue on surfaces, that's called third-hand smoke. You want to think about chemicals that are from couches, like flame retardant chemicals, because we now have labeling, which I teach in the book, to know which couches actually have flame retardant chemicals. And so I want people to see pictures of the actual label so that you could just walk into a store and know exactly what to look for if you're looking for a new couch or you're trying to get rid of an old couch. So a lot of it is just swapping out as best you can. And a lot of it is not buying it in the first place. I mean, the most cost-effective way to reduce chemical burden in your body is not buying junk in the first place that we think we need, like cleaning products up the yin yang. I mean, door cleaners, handle cleaners, window cleaners, stainless steel cleaners, floor. I mean, there's like 1,000 cleaners that you're marketed to when all you need is white vinegar, lemon oil that's natural, baking soda, water, Castile soap, borax. I mean, really just the most simple ingredients can clean everything in your house. Now, when it comes to COVID, we have a whole section on knowing the difference between disinfection and cleaning, because when you know the difference between those two, you can use much different products. So I don't want to go into that detail, but obviously we need to be concerned about COVID, but we want to know when you don't need, the heavy duty cleaners that have a lot more toxicity potentially than the cleaning products that can be much safer. Okay. But I say when you go into a space, you want to really think about your home and what is in the air, what is in the dust. The dust is where most chemicals are collected. And that's chemicals from everything you can think of in the home, even off your shoes, pesticides and carpeting chemicals, stain guard chemicals. If you can get all of those chemicals out, but you want to dust, because dust is really an area where kids touch it, pets touch it. And we now know that pets, certainly cats, are affected by flame retardant chemicals because it was in the cover of the New York Times, the wasting cat syndrome, which came from hyperthyroid from flame retardant chemicals, that someone in New York noticed was an ongoing phenomenon, and it now has a diagnosis because of these exposures. So, they're the canaries in the coal mines, but so are our kids on the floor playing with the dust, playing with toys that are stuck to the dust. So there's lots of things we can do. I don't want to sound like Debbie Downer. The book was meant to empower. It was meant to say, we got this, we got it. And this is really well-studied stuff that we know we can do very simply to change our environmental exposures, which will hopefully and reasonably reduce the risk for many chronic conditions like diabetes, obesity, autoimmune disease, but also reduce our exposure to, our inflammatory response to COVID. I mean, of all times for this to mean something, it just happens that those comorbid conditions are the worst to have when you experience COVID. The more comorbidities you have, the likelier you're going to have a worse response in terms of inflammation. because these chemicals cause inflammation. So now's the time to really, I think about our environments and tone back on, pull back on the chemicals that really mess with our physiology. I have a whole chapter on detox, and the reason is that we need to understand anthropology and understand how the human body is so incredible to be able to remove so many of these, which is remarkable. We've been evolving for over 4.5 million years. We've had over 90,000 chemicals. Literally, that's the going number now of environmental chemicals in food, drinks, cosmetics, water, cleaning products, stain guard, greasing proof chemicals, you name it. We have 90,000 now available on the American market to be used for everything. And to be honest with you, they cause a whole host of issues. As I mentioned, many of them are endocrine disruptors, many of them have heavy metals. But in terms of how we can get rid of these chemicals, our bodies are amazing. We've only had those chemicals in the last 200 years of our evolution. So why would we think that our bodies can handle all those chemicals to break them down? We haven't had time to evolve enough to deal with it, which in one case is why a lot of people are getting sick. It's another case where we have to start to utilize our own body's innate ability to detox, which is exercise, sweating, sauna. Really flooding the liver through exercise really increases what we call stage 2 conjugation, which means breaking down of many of the chemicals. But even if you can't exercise, with arthritis, I see arthritis patients as a rheumatologist, I tell them to get into a steam sauna. I'm not a big fan of infrared sauna, actually. We'll go into that, and it's actually in the book, but I like conventional steam sauna. But we want to be able to sweat things out. We want to sleep better, because sleeping, actually, we now know we have a lymphatic system, which is fluid around the brain that helps clear out chemicals from the brain at night while we sleep. So, I go into the detail of why sleep matters and clean drinking water matters, while clean food matters, managing stress, managing noise pollution. All of those are environmental exposures, it's not just chemicals, it's EMF radiation, it's everything. And so I wanted people to see the vast array of things that affect human health, and then what to do about it. It's all about what to do.
Yep, that's what we like to say, is figure out what it is, why it matters, and then what you can do about it. So I know
And if you guys are on social, oh yeah, thanks, sorry.
your book is chock full of information. We're just hearing just from chapter 4.
Yeah, I do want to mention, so not many people know I started The Smart Human is my educational platform. On Facebook, it's The Smart Human, on Instagram, The Smart Human, and of course, thesmarthuman.com. And I post on Facebook Monday, Wednesday, Friday, bulleted lists for breast cancer prevention, Alzheimer's, baby food, mental health. I just want to give away the farm, because why shouldn't people benefit from this information, especially because a lot of doctors and healthcare providers don't get nutritional training in med school even now. And so I just wanted people to have, I have a bug in here, access to good nutritional information, environmental health information. So if you can follow on Facebook, The Smart Human, or Instagram, Twitter, I recommend it, because I'm just giving people nuggets of information with articles that are vetted and good, reasonable information. So please invite family and friends on Facebook to like the page as well. No one responds to judgment. No one responds to, guilt, regret. These are the things that humans don't respond to that. They respond to a hand holding, let's do this together, take it at your own pace, because it's like a diet. This is not supposed to be diet. This is supposed to be lifestyle changes. This is not something you want to go back from. You want to just keep moving. And that's why I never talk about diets, because those food changes should be for life. It's lifestyle changes. Here's the thing. I think once you've been doing this a long time, and I'm an autoimmune disease specialist, so maybe my training is very different. And, I'm also a realist. I'm also a mom, which I think makes a difference in terms of how much you can get your kids to do this or that, and what choices are practical if you have picky kids and kids with allergies or stomach issues. So, I think all of that, the short answer is I have my own philosophy. I believe in a plant-based diet that has very high quality proteins, whether it's animal meat like turkey or chicken, no antibiotics, no pesticides if you can find it, non-GMO. I probably have meat, high quality meat, maybe 6 times a year. That's it. You know, everything I like to eat is clean. I don't say all no to everything, like no to dairy, unless you feel like that's something that really irritates your body. As Dora Mullen says, listen to your body. You know, how you feel when you eat foods is data. And I've never forgotten that, because I do believe every single one of us is very different in how we handle the foods we eat. Now, in general, I will say there is no value to gluten. It has no nutritional value to the human body. So I don't see what the point is of even having it. We don't even buy products with it, even though we don't need to do that. We just don't do that. I will say organic is the thing that I stick to the most, no matter how you get it. There's a lot of stores that are now really promoting this, big box stores. So I would like to go in that direction. I'm a big fan of filtered water. I think mostly plant-based, good fats, healthy fats, so to speak, you know, extra virgin olive oil, coconut oil, nut butters like almond butter. These are all really healthy fats. I do believe in supplements, but they have to be vetted supplements, and there's a reason for it, because our food quality is terrible. And we don't always know what the quality or the nutrient value of food is. Even if it's organic, we don't know if it's traveled 6 months. We don't know if it's frozen a year, like apples often are. We don't know, you know, what the soil was in terms of nutrient value, even for the organic produce. So I believe in supplements, and I go through that with each patient because everyone's different. But we're in a world now where we have to supplement with the appropriate micronutrients, or else we get thyroid conditions if we don't get enough iodine, which is, you know, vastly under utilized in our food system. We are D deficient. I've never met anyone come through my office as a patient who was not deficient in D, who was not on a supplement. So there are other micronutrients, that zinc, you know, there's a lot of talk right now with COVID and all these nutrients that we're all racing to get into our system. Well, I've been talking about this stuff for a long time. Same with colleagues, because we knew that this was human fertilizer. And that's what I call it. So if you eat the right foods and you get the right supplements, you are much better off at fighting some of these environmental chemicals. Like green leafy vegetables has folate, B9. That has been shown to decrease methylation, which is a bad thing for DNA, when there's exposure to many environmental chemicals, including methylmercury and BPA. So what you eat matters, not just nutritionally, but also for fending off the harmful effects of environmental chemicals. And I'll go through that with patients, or you can actually read it in the book, a lot of it. We have do-it-yourself recipes for cleaning products in this book. We have do-it-yourself recipes for cosmetics, very basic cosmetics that are great. And we also have all the suppers programs recipes. I don't think you mentioned that, but we—
Oh, I did not.
My tribute to Dora Mullen and my buddy, you know, before she passed, I wanted to make sure she gave the blessing on that. And so we have, I don't know, 30 or 40 pages of recipes that are from the suppers programs. And I had asked specifically for detox recipes, and we worked through them to find out which ones had the best recipes with the best ingredients for helping to detox. But they're great recipes.
Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, and everybody also keep up to date on the Smart Human.
Yes, thank you.
And we'd love to have you back another time, maybe after the new year, and talk about another chapter. But thank you so much for being with us, and everybody else, thank you for joining us today as well.